Welcome back, Marines. This will be part 6 of the Fall from Grace for the Department of Ohio and the Marine Corps League National Organization. Many of you may not recognize this emblem, but it's been around since the 1700s. It has been used in most every branch of the military service to include the Marine Corps. It represents the position that requires, at a minimum, wisdom, valor, and justice. The individual holding such a title for any organization is, in essence, the individual that has the highest level of integrity and characteristics infused with wisdom, valor, and justice. He or she must be transparent in their actions and must contain ethical standards that are unquestionable. So what does the JA or Judge Advocate do for the Marine Corps League? Well, he or she shall interpret the national bylaws and administrative procedures. What this means is that all of his or her personal biases and opinions are to be left at the door when reviewing the content and its meaning contained in the documents as approved by the membership. Agree or disagree with what is written is of no concern to them. They are to enforce what is written and approved by the body. He or she shall advise, construe, counsel, and render opinions on questions of law and procedure pertaining to the Marine Corps League, to the National Convention, to the National Commandant, to the National Board of Trustees, all of the national staff and departments, and finally to the detachments. They must provide a copy of all rulings and opinions, and they must submit those immediately to the Chief Operations Officer for the quarterly distribution of said reports. The key word here is distribution. You're entitled to see these findings and rulings to help you manage your department or detachment. In essence, the NJA is the watchdog or policeman for assuring that the strict adherence to all 3 levels of the bylaws and policies are followed. The purpose of this is to assure conformity to the letter and the spirit of accepted laws and policies of the Marine Corps League. He or she is charged with keeping unimpeachable documentation of issues and instances should be made for the record, for review in the future in any similar instances. Lastly, the JA is the keeper, protector, and counselor of those laws, policies, and procedures within all 3 levels of the organization. Just so you know, I cannot take all the credit for what I just covered. The bulk of that information came straight out of the Marine Corps League's documentation. So how about we start with the current JA and see how he stacks up to what is expected from him by our governing documents and you. Mr. Miller assumed his position as the National JA or Judge Advocate at the 2022 National Convention. It appeared that Phil Samore was either finished being the JA after his 1-year term, or someone made the decision for him. You see, normally accepting the JA position calls for an 8-year commitment to the league so that you can eventually become the National Commandant. This is clearly the intent of accepting the position in the first place. Individuals such as Mr. Samore and Mr. Miller here take positions such as these for what we call the white cover, and not to serve you or do as little as possible to serve you on their way up. Like the leadership that was at the department level of Ohio, their only concern is how high can we go. All of this is supported by the Meet the Candidates webinar put on by the national organization. Unfortunately, I did not see Mr. Miller running for a second tour or term, which begs the question that was laid regarding Mr. Samora. Why? I, as I have done in previous episodes, can only give you my opinion, and that is they brought in a box of rocks to do their bidding, and now they no longer need that boulder, and it's time to move on, as Mr. Baker moves out of office into the junior past national commandant position. In August of 2022, Mr. Miller becomes the new JA, as we noted, for the national organization. It was kept on the down low as to why Phil Samora didn't run for a second term. Some said it was his health. Others said it was more than he expected, the job requirements. And lastly, certain individuals were saying that Johnny Baker threw him under the bus for the job he did with Ohio or lacked to do. We do know that his wife debunked the health issue, so he's in good health. So we're grateful for that. Yet the other two reasonings still stand or are in question. Mr. Samora was given a chance to explain, and he decided not to say anything, almost as if he signed an NDA with the national organization, much like the Bloom brothers did when Mr. Baker was the JA, and they ended up being paid off by the league's insurance to go away with the money they had already embezzled. Can you believe that? It happened. Yeah, Mr. Baker was involved with that too. Moving on. Mr. Miller's first week in, and he had already 9 disciplinary filings awaiting his skill set as the newest JA for the national organization. Those cases were against the following individuals: Tim Sherman, Roger Smith, Tom Seymour, Jimmy Kay, Darrell Logan, and myself. There were multiple cases filed against Roger Smith, Tom Seymour, and Jimmy Kay, which accounted for the number. But I almost forgot. Like I said, there was a case filed against me as well. I don't want to seem biased. If you viewed or reviewed or even listened to the end of any of the previous episodes, you would know exactly what the charges were and the findings against those individuals. However, I will now provide the actual paraphrased verbiage, and I promise not to drag it out too long. The first case we'll talk about is the Tim Sherman case. This case has been going on since around June of 2021, back and forth, back and forth. Anyway, when it was finally heard at the fall conference in October of 2021, Mr. Groen was denied multiple due process rights guaranteed by Chapter 9 by the department leadership, which comprised the hearing board in said case. The appeal was processed, put together, and filed, and in January of 2022, Mr. Groen was granted a new trial based on those findings. Now, he was also instructed at that time to go ahead, and if he chose to refile said charges against Tim Sherman, that he would get a new trial. But he had to do it with or going through the department's JA first. Now, we know that Jimmy Kay was illegally installed at the spring conference for the Central Division back in March of 2022. However, Mr. Groen went ahead and filed those charges, requesting a new trial as per the appeal letter granting him with Jimmy Kay. Well, Jimmy Kay turned around and denied that trial request based on no new evidence being presented that would warrant opening this trial again. Clearly, he didn't understand what it meant to get a new trial, but it was denied. Okay, so Mr. Groen turned around and now refiled again these charges to Mr. Miller. Now, Mr. Miller also found there's no new evidence that warranted a new trial. He too totally ignored what was granted to him in the letter from Mr. Samore, the National JA at the time. Ladies and gentlemen, you don't have to have new evidence to get a new trial. We are getting a new trial or requested a new trial based on the negligence of the internal process or performance of the department leadership. So he's entitled to a new trial with the same old evidence. He gets a chance to re-present his case. But he'll always be denied that because it looks upon Mr. Sherman unfavorably, which contradicts what the National tries to present Mr. Sherman as being. Moving on, the charges filed against Roger Smith dealt with quorum violations as the number one charge in two separate filings. He basically did not, and knowingly did not, adhere to the 2019 through 2022 national approved bylaws and administrative procedures, nor did he adhere to those listed in the 2019 department bylaws and administrative procedures regarding quorum requirements. Now, no one or everyone must realize that these charges that were written up against Roger Smith came after the national organization validated that the quorum violations did in fact occur and that they have merit and that all business transactions to include elections from June of 2021 to present day, which was August 5th at that time, were null and void. The letter again stated that all officers and appointed individuals were illegally elected and installed. They validate all of the claims made in the charges that came to Mr. Miller after said letter was published, so Mr. Miller would have a copy of this said letter knowing that these issues occurred and were validated. But you guessed it, Mr. Miller turns around and finds no merit. Now, wait until you hear why. This will really get you going and make you wonder why he's the JA or why he's still in that position. So, he bases his finding, and I quote, that the petitioners could not prove that the department bylaws had a quorum when they were approved in 2019, not only by the body, but by the National JA Warren Griffin. In other words, we could not prove to him that there was a quorum when those bylaws were passed requiring him, Roger Smith, to follow the quorum requirements. He doesn't say anything about the national ones that Roger Smith violated, just the department ones. That's a little too convenient, a little bullshit if you ask me. However, he also stated, and this is a good one, that it's not Roger Smith's responsibility in those positions that he filled to ensure that there's a quorum existing prior to the conducting of official business. It is not his sole responsibility. It falls on everybody. So everyone should be charged with the violation. I don't understand this. I really don't. And everybody else that I show these documents to, that reads it, or explain it to, that looks it up and reads it, are dumbfounded by Mr. Schultz's diagnosis or findings. That's right, I call him Sergeant Schultz. That's who he is. So, I believe, and I seriously believe that one, Mr. Miller has no clue, is absolutely dumbfounded by what is required of him and by what is required of him by the national organization's documentation that was read to you in the very first slide. He has no wisdom. He has no valor. And he damn sure cannot deduce that 1 + 1 = 2. I'm at a loss for words. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. And I really don't think all of that pertains to Mr. Miller. Really, I don't. What I really do think is going on here is that Mr. Miller is guided and groomed to do whatever Mr. Baker wants him to do. And you'll see that a little later on. That's what I believe. I believe that Mr. Baker is an empty vessel and will do only what he's asked to do, period. Without any judgment, decision making, any conscience, nothing. It's a shame. But let's move on. Tom Seymour on this slide was charged for misappropriation of department and detachment funds, falsifying ROIs, money laundering, and not maintaining the required state and federal records for review and adjudication as required by state and federal law. So, what did Mr. Miller do? He said he reviewed it and read all the pertinent information, but found no merit to substantiate any of these claims. His rationale now, okay, for instance, on one particular charge, was that the department is responsible for the reimbursement of those funds or expenses incurred by members of the hearing board. And that's true. It says that. I'm 100% with that. Outstanding analogy. However, Mr. Miller and those listening, if you read on, it will also state that any of these expenditures have to be approved by the Board of Trustees or the body prior to making them. You see, Mr. Miller doesn't tell you that because the department's on the hook for them, it doesn't mean that they have to drop everything they're doing and cut that check. What it means is that, yes, the department is obligated to pay those. However, the department will pay them once the Board of Trustees and or the body approves said expenditures, which they normally always do because the department is on the hook. The paymaster just don't take it on his own to do that. There's checks and balances here. The next question that was contained in all of that was why Mr. Seymour would reimburse Roger Smith for his expenses incurred for a hearing board that he was not a member of. Mr. Smith was not a member of said hearing board. That's right, I said it twice just so you understand that. Mr. Miller believes that he's entitled to reimbursement. God knows why, but evidently he didn't look at the hearing board assignment chart because Mr. Smith was not on it. Mr. Smith, in fact, was just a witness for the petitioner. Now, the witnesses, other witnesses for the petitioner and or the respondent that attended said hearing didn't get reimbursed for their travel or expenses. So why does Mr. Smith believe he gets it? Unbelievable. He just made in a reimbursement claim. Mr. Seymour just wrote him a check. And Mr. Seymour wrote a check reimbursing Jimmy K. And now everyone knows, and everyone knew at that time, that Jimmy K was not the legal department judge advocate. He was illegally installed by Johnny Baker in March of 2023, which was overturned in August of 2022. And I correct myself. He was installed in the March Spring Central Division Conference in 2022. My error. It was overturned in August of 2022 by Mr. Baker. Now, why would you cut a check for almost $700 to Mr. K. In essence, Mr. Seymour took $1,000 or so from the department general fund and gave it to individuals that were not entitled to have it. And that's why it requires a board of trustee and or the body's approval prior to doing it. That is the check and balances. So Mr. Miller not only condoned that practice, but found no merit in him being out of line. The other thing that really touched off was the fact that Mr. Seymour was allowed to write checks out of the general fund of both the department and his detachment for membership dues monies to be paid to department and national. Well, paymasters do that, right? They receive the check, let's say from me, I pay my membership dues, I turn it in. Mr. Seymour supposedly is supposed to deposit that money now straight into the accounts. Then write the checks and attach them to the appropriate transmittals and submit them for authentication. In other words, processing. So, Mr. Seymour, as noted in the charges and as proven by the evidence gathered by Mr. Holt in March of 2023, failed to do that. What he was doing, ladies and gentlemen, was I could come up to Mr. Seymour and say, hey, why don't you pay my membership dues? I'll get you a check. That's what he was doing. He was, in essence, paying membership dues without receiving the funds into the general funds of both the detachment and department. So, basically, that's what he was doing. You cut him a check, he'd write a check, but he'd never deposit the damn check. And that's in violation of the bylaws. It clearly states that he must immediately, as soon as possible, deposit those funds he receives into the appropriate accounts, or could be subject to disciplinary action, which Mr. Miller says, no, he's not. It's okay. Let's just look the other way. No merit. So, I guess it's okay for everybody to do that. Go ahead and start that practice if you want. I wouldn't, because it's illegal. Now, the last piece, the money laundering, is great. The money laundering occurred when Mr. Seymour would receive funds from the Justice Chambers Foundation, deposit those funds into the detachment's general fund, turn around, write a check out of that detachment fund, and give it back to the Justice Chambers Foundation for use in operations. As Mr. Holt, who investigated this on the request of Mr. Miller, found that this occurred because the foundation was defunct since 2010. It had no legal standing as a charity or registered as a business any longer in the state of Ohio, yet Mr. Seymour was moving money back and forth between the accounts. What did Mr. Miller say about this? Even after Mr. Holt proved it was happening and substantiated it, no merit. Absolutely no merit. So guess what happened to Mr. Seymour? He's now the new department commandant. Yay! See? Doing bad shit sometimes gets a reward. And in the Department of Ohio, along with certain officers from the National, it always gets a reward. Tim Sherman gets to wear a gold cover saying he's a National Veteran Service officer appointed by Johnny Baker, according to Mr. Holt, when in fact that never happened. It never occurred, but he's sporting that cover. He is. Mr. Seymour gets to become the department commandant for the Department of Ohio, even though he got caught laundering money, writing checks when he wasn't supposed to, doing all kind of things. There is reward in doing bad with these officers. Why do I say that? Why do I believe all this? And why do you think I tell you this shit is hard to make up? But seriously, it's happening, and it has happened because many of us right here in Ohio are living through it and been part of it and just cannot fathom the ignorance of the national officers to believe or to support these wrongdoings and to tell us that it's okay. Unbelievable. Lastly, the charges against Mr. Logan that I filed were for falsifying the installation of officers in May 18th of 2022, threatening me with bodily harm at the January 2022 get-together, and under oath at an official Marine Corps League hearing board function making false accusations and uttering false statements, as proven by the minutes and the supporting documentation. You have to understand, Mr. Logan was charged with this after the August 5th. He turned around and charged me on August 6th. But I charged him with the same thing, tit for tat, bullshit. It could have been resolved if he was man enough to stand up and go through it and understand where people are coming from and perhaps look at a different view. I've done that with him and offered my olive branch on multiple occasions, and basically he told me to stick it in my butt. And that's why at the last meeting in January, he had to be physically restrained from coming in and attacking me. Unbelievable. So, now we know there was no official business, and we know all the other things, and I'm not going to go into all those things. Okay? But Mr. Logan did falsify the ROI with Roger Smith and Tom Seymour. When questioned other officers that were listed on there, they were unaware that this happened. They did not even know they were installed, but yet it was allowed to go to National. It was approved by National, and Mr. Miller ignored it. Then Mr. Miller ignores the fact that Mr. Logan falsified statements while under oath with the minutes provided from the official hearings and proven to be false. He finds no merit in that as well. The minutes or the notes of the January 2022 meeting of the department clearly state that Mr. Logan had to be restrained from attacking me. Mr. Miller again ignores it. Says not enough evidence. So, in everything that revolved around Mr. Logan, Mr. Miller finds no merit. And as proven before, Mr. Logan and Mr. Baker are buds, two peas in a pod since back by the Bloom Brother days. But that's okay. It is what it is. Mr. Logan is dirty and corrupt and a liar, just like the rest of the leadership out of the Department of Ohio and the national organization that have been involved with these ongoing since 2021. All right, so of the 9 cases filed with the newly appointed JA, which one do you think took priority? Which one do you believe was the number one priority of NJA Mr. Miller? Well, of course, Marine Smith. That's me. Remember when I said there were 9? This is the 9th case. The timeline for said cases, 3 of them, as a matter of fact, started back in January 2022, and we'll not get into any more of them. And I'm talking about against me, and they were all by the same individual on the same issues. 3 of them, all been overturned and kicked out. The one that we will discuss relatively quickly, hopefully, and easily, and easy to follow, is the most recent one, which occurred August 6th of 2022. Now, Mr. Miller was also the NJA, and he sat in on the hearing against me regarding these very same charges. That's right. Mr. Miller must not either understand or give a damn about what is known as a conflict of interest and how it pertains to being fair and impartial when adjudicating cases. Anyway, let's just get to it. Here are the facts. Mr. Baker sends out the letter. We all know about it, suspending the Ohio Charter, outlining all those issues. But the number one issue is the lack of quorum, thereby nullifying all regular business transactions of the Department of Ohio back to June of 2021. Fact two, Mr. Baker publishes a second letter, August 6, 2022, overturning all cases, disciplinary or grievance in nature, but overturning all cases from Ohio back to June of 2021, except, and I make a point of reference on this, except for his and Mr. Samora's case, which was found to have no merit with quorum violations. Quite convenient, if I do say so. Very convenient. Mr. Miller is, of course, made aware of all of these items surrounding the Department of Ohio prior to any of the individuals, except for Mr. Logan, receiving any kind of notification of said letter. Mr. Logan had already gotten the word and already resubmitted charges against me for the very same thing, with the very same verbiage, with no thing changed except the date that was thrown out 3 times already. So, what are we doing here? It's unbelievable that Mr. Miller on August 6th received and acknowledged Mr. Logan's filing prior to it even getting out that they were overturned to the other parties involved in all the other cases. It's a good reach around for Mr. Baker to let him know, Mr. Logan, that he was going to go do that. Now, fact 3, the charges that were made were handing out political materials at an official Marine Corps League function, which was the Department of Ohio June 2021 convention and the fall conference in October of 2021, for attacking the Marine of the Year Society by asking Mr. Logan about the selection process and how it appears to be unfair, and for wearing the wrong cover. So, the cover issue was mine. I owned it from the beginning, and I was unaware that I was not entitled to wear said cover from serving on 2 national committees after I was no longer on the committees. I assumed that I could wear that cover as the highest office held at a non-Marine Corps League function, such as I do with the American Legion, DAV, 40 and 8, AMVETS, and on and on. That was my mistake, and I owned it. So there's not much we can argue about that. Now, keep in mind what has been already said and validated by Mr. Baker and the National Board of Trustees on the following. And this is what's contained in Mr. Miller's findings. As to charge 1, found guilty of wearing the wrong cover. Understood. Punishment, removed from the Marine Corps League rolls. Kicked out. For the second time, because Mr. Miller and Mr. Borka removed me from the rolls when he lied to the National Commandant and Mr. Borka that I'd never requested a copy of said hearing board minutes. So they went ahead and after my time lapse of I believe it's 30 days, they can go ahead and remove me from the rolls. So based on that, I contacted them, showed them the letter I sent Mr. Miller, and Mr. Borka reinstated me. So I don't know how things work, but he lied. I got taken off the rolls. Then I got put back on the rolls. Who knows? I was found guilty on charge 2 for attacking the Marine of the Year program. even though, now keep in mind, even though the hearing board chairman, Mr. Hunter, said that this charge will not be considered in the final rulings of the hearing board. Now, this information and that statement is contained on the official transcript of said hearing. Punishment for asking about selection process, removed from the Marine Corps League rolls, kicked out. Now, the last one I saved, which probably was the first charge on the sheet, was for handing out political materials at an official Marine Corps League function. I stress that again, official Marine Corps League function, which was the June 2021 Department Convention and the fall October Department Conference. That's what's in the charge sheet. So you might be thinking it was surrounding all of this, and the letters in August nullified all of that, saying there was no official function of the Department of Ohio, and that no official business was going to be transacted, and that all of it, any of that business handled, was nullified. So how can you charge someone with doing something at a non-official Marine Corps League function? I'm still trying to figure that out. And I proved that. But I was surprised. I really was. I was taken back by it. And I don't know if you will either, but let me go ahead and give it to you. I wasn't found guilty of handing out political materials at those two events because they couldn't do that. And Mr. Miller realized that. Mr. Miller instead turned around and found me guilty of handing out political materials at the National Convention in Illinois. That's right. Guilty of handing out political materials at the National Convention during official business now in Illinois. So, that is amazing. Justification for said charge, and this is where it gets really good for you. So justification for said charge was that I was working a civilian table handing out Convention of States material to whomever wanted them in a civilian attire. Now, in other words, I was wearing a pair of jeans, a polo shirt, not like this one, but a polo shirt with nothing on it, handing out literature to individuals that came by the table if they so desired it. Okay. Now, that's not during official business. That's out there in the breezeway somewhere, and we're not conducting official Marine Corps League business during that time, and I was not part of that official Marine Corps League business if they were doing a staff meeting somewhere or whatever. So I couldn't have done that during an official meeting. Here's how he ties it up. I go to the conference that afternoon, let's say, when they reopen or bring the session back into business, back online, and I'm in there wearing my Marine Corps League uniform like I'm supposed to, and I'm attending as a duly registered delegate of Ohio the convention on the floor. Now that's official business. It's open, the Bible's open, and I'm on the floor. He said, and I quote, and it's in the write-up, that because I was out there working in the hallway somewhere in civilian attire, that an individual within the meeting or within the business function of that convention while we're doing business could remember seeing me doing that, and that now, because I'm wearing that uniform, would give the impression that the Marine Corps League supported that endeavor. Therefore, I'm guilty. Did you follow that? That's like me telling you, you know I've been kicked out of the Marine Corps League. I'm wearing a shirt, polo, it's got the Marine Corps League emblem in the state of Ohio on. I don't know if you can see it, but now that you see that, Can you infer that the Department of Ohio is in support of my presentations and that they validate all that and that it's good to go? Can you infer that based on my shirt? No, you can't. I can wear whatever damn shirt I want when I'm not in official business. I can do whatever the hell I want when I'm not doing official Marine Corps League business. Mr. Miller is way out of bounds, way out, and doesn't know how to reel his ass back into reality. So, with all that said, you know I'm out of the Marine Corps League. And after a year or so of being on temporary suspension and beating the charges on 2 other occasions, they found that their Sergeant Schultz and I are no good for the league. So he's not going to run for another term. I'm going to go on that. But they did get what they wanted. They got me out of the Marine Corps League. I've been kicked to the curb for wearing civilian attire, working out in the hallway, because somebody might remember that I did that and now believe that the Marine Corps League supports what I was doing. All of this bullshit comes about 18 months after the initial thing began. And it began because the department leadership mistreated a fellow Marine and denied him his due process guaranteed by Chapter 9, and he wanted to file an appeal, and I helped him. That's why we're doing all this. This is what prompted all of these lies, these cover-ups, and all the things that I've been reporting. That simple fact right there. So, Marines, in summary, Mr. Miller's time as the NJA has been ripe with lies and poor job performance. This could be why he's not running, like I said earlier, for a second term. At every turn, his brain housing group had only one thought: kick Marine Smith out, as per Mr. Baker's desires. Well, I'm out. No big deal, no hard feelings. But as you may or may not know, it was a struggle for them to get me out because I fought back. I would not be discredited, disgraced, or stepped on by such a group of individuals without a fight. And that's what being a Marine's all about. I protect my honor, my integrity, and my commitment to God, country, and Corps. So, how did they get me out? You guessed it, I said it. They actually turned around and lied about facts and lied and misrepresented those facts and made the statement, you're out. They didn't care about the injustice or any of that. All of the National Board of Trustee members went along with it because they were afraid to cross Johnny Baker. As others know him, Johnny Liar Baker. What a nickname to get from other Marines. Johnny the Liar Baker. Unbelievable. So, again, I did wear the wrong cover. Kick me the hell out. That's fine. And I guess they believed the punishment befitted the crime. Here are some quick facts in summary surrounding just this case. One, Mr. Logan wrote a handwritten letter to Mr. Miller, attached it to the charge or the grievance filing, that he only wanted this entire thing to be a grievance. And he dated it August 6, 2022. Mr. Miller, knowing what Mr. Baker wanted, changed that to a disciplinary charge because he cannot kick or hold anybody accountable or punish anyone on a grievance filing. It has to be disciplinary. So Mr. Miller took it upon himself and changed it. He never put out an amendment or a statement of fact or provided any proof that Mr. Logan changed his mind from his original request to make it a grievance. Oh my God, let's just do what we want. Fact number 2, The charges contained in the write-up were wearing the wrong cover, asking the Marine of the Year program a question or attacking it, and handing out those political materials. Like I said, I owned all that. We've went over the Marine of the Year thing, and we went over the political materials, okay? He lied. He just outright lied and made me guilty by association based on what I was doing out there on the curb to what I may be doing inside official business, and how someone could assume that the league would support that. That'd be just like him wearing MAGA support or Trump support, walking around, going to the bar after dinner, after all business is conducted, and then the next day when they open up the session, he's got his Marine Corps League uniform on, that I could assume, based on his findings, I could assume that the Marine Corps League supports Trump because I remember him wearing it. What other bullshit can you come up with? What an idiot. To put that in writing and to state that as grounds to kick a Marine out of the Marine Corps League. Unbelievable. So, Mr. Miller has also lied on multiple occasions, especially about never receiving my request for a copy of the minutes. I've sent this numbnuts a buttload of documents, certified return receipt mailed to the address I sent the letter to. And you didn't get it. That's what his statement was to the National Commandant in a letter. Mr. Miller then has been served since and during all of this multiple, I'm not saying one or two, I'm saying multiple or several motions of failure to follow procedures as dictated and prescribed in our current 2022 national bylaws and administrative procedures. He cannot do his job in accordance with those procedures. He has failed on multiple fronts and still allowed to perform with no consequences. Mr. Miller denied myself and another petitioner the right to an appeal by only returning to us our findings on our cases on the December 23rd, gave us 2 weeks to prove that the respondents received notice that we wanted to appeal, which would have gave us only 4 days to collect, produce the letter, get them to the respondent, get it back from the respondent, put it in an envelope, send it to him by the date that he set up the appeal hearing, which in reality just denied us that right up front. He just cut it off. He didn't want us to bring our case before the Board of Trustees. So, and lastly, Mr. Miller and Mr. Borka, who have yet still to do their due diligence in accordance with those directives by removing me from the rolls, because I've yet to get my certified letter saying I've been removed from the rolls. All I got was the results of a hearing board review. After that review, they have X amount of days. I believe it's 30. He has to submit a letter to Mr. Borka requesting I be stricken from the rolls. Mr. Borka then has to send and have proof that I've been notified that this letter has been sent in, and then that has to go in, and then I have to be stricken. I'm off the rolls, and none of that shit's ever happened. They continue to do what they want, when they want, how they want, in disregard for whatever we wanted when we approved these bylaws and administrative procedures. That Chapter 9 guarantees us due process, which they have taken and stepped on and thrown out the damn window. So, Mr. Borka, for a guy who gets a high six-figured salary, ladies and gentlemen, sure does not know his job. But that is a subject for another episode. Until next time, Marines, keep some powder dry and Semper Fi. Oh, by the way, P.S. I really do not care that I'm out of the league, honestly. It was a means to an end. It was an opportunity to share camaraderie and do things in my community while being a Marine leaguer. I can still do these things in my community, and I can still have camaraderie as a regular Marine because I haven't lost that. What I care about, though, and why I'm doing this, is because they believe they can do it what they did to me to any of you, to any member that pays his dues and does his due diligence, that they can mistreat them and treat them just as they've treated me. And if you're not careful, ladies and gentlemen, you could be the next one on the Baker hit list. Unless, like others have, become their personal pals. God bless.